Hey everybody, nice to see you all here. Thanks for joining in. I'm going to start recording here in just a minute. I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to just allow everybody to talk if they want, because it's might be more of a discussion. I will pin myself for the beginning here in just a little bit. And if people don't want to talk, they don't have to talk or show themselves, of course. Yeah, but thanks for joining me. I know some of you are probably joining me from far away. Good morning, Heather Joy. Good morning, Evelina and Christy and Marion and Michelle. Wherever you all are calling in from. I know Marion, I think, is often from Ireland, joining us from there. So some other folks joining in. Fletcher, Joelle. Another minute or two for everybody to join in, but a little bit of a overcast, cool day here. Not too cold though, not too bad for February. Everything is starting to bud up a little bit. Definitely feels like spring is a little bit on the way. So, no, some people where you are, it might not feel like that, but around here it's starting to do that. So, yeah. Hey, Fletcher. Yeah, feel free. Yeah, hi Mink. Up in Vancouver. Welcome, Mink. And it's Ireland at 7 p.m. Mink, did you change your name to Fletcher? Is that an ongoing thing? You have to tell me about that later. All right, I'm gonna record everybody. So, all right. Well, hello everybody. Welcome. Appreciate you all showing up. And yeah, Mink, it's great to have you here. Mink, I don't know if you all know, Mink is the designer of my website and is an amazing artist. I highly recommend checking out Design by Mink. I'm going to just put in this unofficial plug. Mink, you can be the special sponsor for this talk today. Yeah, welcome everybody. Excited to do this. Every once in a while I pick a topic and then I get 7 emails or 10 emails or 20 emails of people like, I can't make it, but will you please record it? So yes, I record all of them, and sometimes they're more interesting than not. But well, everybody feel free to type into the chat where you're calling from and anything you're thankful for if you'd like. I'm definitely thankful for the reemergence of some of the plant life that's happening. And yeah, it's really cool to just see plants slowly emerging, the hints of spring in the air. I know some people are like, there's no way it's not spring until March 21st, but I was just reading an article in the local weather here talking about what they call solar spring, and that solar spring does actually begin in February because of the change of light. And oh, Michelle, you got some snow there and you're thankful for it. Yay, for the nitrogen to give our soil a reboot. Awesome. And Evelina is calling in for Crawford. Yeah, Evelina and I met last week, and we're going to probably do one of these together pretty soon and talk about the amazing project that she has going on in Colorado. That is a whole permaculture rejuvenation project off grid. And I think we're going to be able to do a live class there sometime this spring. So a lot to have gratitude for today. And thank you for all of you who are tuning in live or, recorded. And I want this to turn into a discussion, but I'm going to kind of put out there some ideas. So, and this is going to, I think, be controversial. And, people like Mink, who I've known for, I don't know, a long time, they know I don't really shy from controversy very much, but I'm not trying to provoke people or stir up things. I'm just talking about things that I think are inherently challenging, often to our kind of current dominant paradigm of life. And if you're tuned into this, you're probably somebody who's at least familiar with some other ideas around this. So what I'm really talking about is, so I wrote a book a few years ago called Primal: Why We Long to Be Loud. And some of you might have read it. I'm gonna add it in the chat. And it was put out by Falcon Press, and really wonderful to work with Falcon. And the book was pretty outside of their normal range of what they write about. It's related to survival skills, but it was really I feel like they really took a flyer on me to do this book. So I'm thankful that they really did. And the premise of the book is that I was looking at this big shift that's happened over the last 30 years, where there's all of this interest in survival skills all over the world. What we call survival skills. We could call them ancestral skills. We could call it rewilding. But there's been this big shift, this movement towards more and more interest. And some of you on this call, I know, are people who work in that field, right? Or you're part of that movement, of this sort of larger rewilding, kind of this undercurrent, sort of the opposite of the overly materialistic, consumeristic, device-heavy world that's happening. There's this other thing happening. And Primal really tried to address the idea of like, why in the 21st century, with all of our devices and all our comforts, are people still like just losing their minds over the survival skills? And why do they tune into shows? Like, there's some of the most popular TV shows in the world. Why do they tune into shows about it? Why do they go to survival schools? Why is it that people are literally interested in a Stone Age level technology in the modern world? And the premise of that book, the basic idea was, well, because that's what we're designed for. And specifically, that's what our brains are designed for. Now, there's a lot of evidence that backs that up, okay? Like, especially an anthropological point of view, which is my background, is actually in anthropology, though I've spent a long time now in being a naturalist and an ethnobotanist and in the ancestral skills field. But the idea is that we have, and this is pretty well scientifically established, that for 200,000 years, maybe longer, our brains and bodies have been pretty much the same. There hasn't been a lot of physical evolution that's taken place. And so for the vast majority of that time, we've spent, around at least 180,000 years of that. Our primary mode of being was hunter-gatherer nomads, with maybe various level degrees of some sort of degree of working with plants on like sort of a pre-agricultural or a agricultural level, but a tending level, like a gardening level, not a necessarily wide-scale agricultural level. Hi, Joel. Thanks for calling in from Eugene. Yay. And that premise itself for some people is pretty controversial, but I think, and the book is based on that premise. But one of the things is like, and this is where it gets kind of tricky, is like, it's kind of one of those arguments, and I got this feedback from my editors, like, there's not a counter argument to that, right? There really isn't a very strong counter argument to it. So as people are reading this book, and they're getting into it, there's this threatening quality to their way of life and their being about like, oh yeah, like, maybe if my brain is a hunter-gatherer brain, even though it hasn't grown up that way, but it's designed for that, and I'm not actually doing things that are at least somewhat related to that, or something somewhat similar to that, maybe it's going to cause my brain stress. Maybe it's going to cause a hard time. Maybe it's going to, freak me out. Maybe I'm going to have anxiety and depression. And so suddenly it becomes this very threatening to our common world idea. Yeah, and thank you, Evelina. It's cognitive dissonance. It's like, are we all living in a constant state of cognitive dissonance? And what we can notice, I wrote this in some of the emails that some of you probably read before you showed up, this idea of like, well, do you ever notice what happens to your brain and your emotions and your body when you go outside? And there's all these things that now there's all this scientific evidence of, like, I go outside, and within like for some people, it's like 10 seconds to about 1 minute, there's an immediate shift. And it's usually when Kathleen, who does the work with all the I can't remember Kathleen's name right now. I'll look it up in a little bit. Anyway, Kathleen does a lot of work with this. I interviewed her for my Primal conference a couple months ago, back last year. As soon as our brain engages with something outside, whether it's a sound of a bird, the feel of wind on our skin, the light, the shift in light, something happens to our brain and it actually starts to relax, and this whole cascade of things happen. Yes, from RX Outside. Thank you, Joelle. So there's that, what happens, right? And then there's this other thing that happens about 15 minutes or so after we're outside, 15 to 20 minutes. There's this whole other level of relaxation and these happy brain chemicals that happen. And then now there's this like whole other thing, like about 3 hours outside if it happens. And it's as long as you're not like super cold, super hungry, super tired, these things start to happen to your brain. This is well documented scientifically now too. And it's in the field of neurology, like what's actually happening at the chemical and neurological level. So if we're not getting that, it can be challenging for ourselves. And so when I was writing the book, the chapter that I got the most pushback on, and most of it, people were pretty great. And this isn't to say anything wrong about the editors of Falcon. They were great people to work with. But the one that I got the most pushback on, the most controversial, was the chapter I wrote all about kids who are raised with this stuff, who are basically raised with hunter-gatherer, or at least simulated hunter-gatherer activities, rewilding activities, survival skills, hands-on things like that. And what happens to them when they're exposed to this? And it's all anecdotes, but they were like, there was definitely parts in here where the editor's like, I don't think you can say this name. And it's difficult because we live in this age where everybody wants everything to be proven, but all of the ways that we prove things are often controlled in very specific ways, and it can sometimes prevent results from happening. So then we have to look at anecdotes. But I anecdotally, as an instructor who has been doing this over 20 years, yeah, thank you, Evelina, the observer effect, for over 20 years, and my own journey with that, which I can share a little bit about, has seen that basically, and I got into trouble about this at a conference too. So there's a conference that I went to that was about environmental education and ADHD, and there's somebody up there that was talking about the therapeutic aspects of like once kids get diagnosed with ADHD and then they're taken outside, how it really helps them out. But my premise was that ADHD isn't really a real diagnosis, or it's a symptom, not a symptom of an issue with society, not actually a real problem. And when I say that, people sometimes get really pissed. And they're like, well, but my kid or me or I'm on medicine. And I'm not saying that, Ritalin doesn't help some people or isn't the right thing for people. But what I've seen time and time again, like dozens of times, is especially with kids, though sometimes teenagers or even young adults are taken outside and they have a nature-based curriculum, and they not only suddenly lose that label in the sense of like they're no longer quote problematic or whatever, they actually thrive, they actually excel. And part of it is that the classroom environment for them is not a stimulating enough environment, that looking at a screen is not enough a stimulating environment. In fact, I'll bet there's people on this call right now. This is what I would be doing if I was on this call. I would have my headphones in, and I might even have the screen on, but I'd be out walking around, or I'd be doing something else, because like my brain, the way it works is I can't just sit and listen to something. And I know like that's ironic because I always want people to sit and listen to what I'm doing with my classes. But like there's a classroom is a static. Yeah, John's busted. Makes painting. Haha. Okay, exactly. That's totally. I'm so happy you're doing that. All of you who are doing that, yay. But you know, our brains are designed for a more complicated, stimulating environment than the classroom. And when people say, well, classrooms are so loud and noisy with all the kids, I'm like, yeah, but like, if our brain is expecting like green plant life, bird language, wind, clouds, sunlight, interplay of all that stuff, there's a certain number of us, and the secret is, I think it might be all of us, when we go out and we get that, our brains actually calm down, and then we can really focus, or we can really be paying attention to one thing, and it may actually be very helpful for us from a survival perspective to actually pay attention to more than one thing at a time. And another thing that I was told when I was writing this is, in research and stuff, is like there's this idea that like we can't actually multitask. There's this story out now from neurologists like, oh yeah, you can't actually do more than one thing. And I'm like, that is so not true. Like most of the people I know, like, so my wife, Karen, who some of you know, very creative person, needs to move a lot, is a kinesthetic learner, a dancer. When she has to be on a meeting, right, for work, she'll put on her headphones and she'll clean the house, or she'll go for a walk, because she can't, and it enhances her ability to learn and pay attention to what other people are saying. Yeah, that then she can actually hear what's going on. Yeah, exactly. The depth of what, thank you, Michelle. The depth of what a person is living in extends and allows the brain to see further than the cave it is in. Yeah. And even the cave, right? Let's say we were in a cave back in the day and we were working on projects around a fire. There's a fire we're tending, there's the projects we're working on, but there's also like wind coming from the outside, and there's some peripheral level of our awareness that's probably checking out the world for danger and for sounds or disturbance. So and then there's this kind of immediate effect, or we'll say it's a short-term effect for some of those kids, some people, myself included, several of my family members, there's people in my family that are have varying diagnoses, like a lot of people do. And, there's varying letters for our diagnoses, it's like ADD, ADHD, anxiety, OCD, all this stuff, right? Anxious depression, whatever. And all of us, therapeutically, it's really helpful to not be inside too much and not moving. And the more we move and the more we're outside, the better it is. So there's a personal level to this too. I'm imagining some of you on this call that there's a personal level, that you have a personal relationship with this as well. It's not just your work thing, or you're interested in this in a theoretical manner. So this is another thing that's very interesting. So those people who go into those environments and they're in the educational environment that's not traditional, and they're outside, or maybe they're in the traditional environment, but they get outside enough and it helps, right? So there's been a lot of studies that shown like some outside time helps you be able to go back into the classroom and sit down and focus. So that's kind of the baseline level. What there's been a lot less studies of, but there's definitely a whole lot of anecdotal evidence, or I've seen a lot and experienced a lot, is students who cannot do very well in an traditional academic setting go and spend a year in an immersive program, or a couple years, then suddenly develop the capacity to go back into the classroom and be really functional. And actually their learning capabilities are sometimes jump to such a degree that they go from being like labeled with a learning disability to actually gifted, what we would call gifted, whatever the current term is that. Yeah, John, you're right. And then the people who go back in, it can be really hard for them, right? I've had several students, some of which I write about in my book, and they were all women, they were all female. I don't know why that is the case, but that they all came and were in the programs I was teaching of. And then they later went back to a college level setting. Some of these are people who couldn't really, may not have done particularly well in high school. Some of them had done okay in high school, but just couldn't take it emotionally or whatever. Or they started in a college program, they didn't do so well in the college program. They came, they spent a year or two in this like very immersive program, the one that Mink was a part of. And then they went back to an academic setting, a traditional 4 years college academic setting. Multiple of these people now have master's degrees or PhDs, and they were so exceptional in their capacity to learn. Their professors became very interested in how they had learned how to learn, essentially what had turned on for them, because they were so engaged. Yeah, and then so yeah, I'm just checking out the chat here. Oh, painting. Yes, painting can be really helpful, Michelle. And I'm not familiar with laser painting, but and then Evelina talking here about the controversy about pharmaceutical approach to unwanted behavior. Yeah. Yeah, depression is maybe a very healthy response to what is happening in the world right now. Subduing yourselves with drugs might not solve the overarching issue, right? Like with climate change and these things. My eldest child is dealing with this right now, and we had a really heart-to-heart conversation last year about, climate change is something they started talking about when I was a teenager, at least in the school I was in, and it's been 30 years since I was in high school, and there hasn't been any good progress really made on it, or very much, right? And what it's like to be in their shoes and be given this world that it's such a problem, and also this simultaneous expectation that they're going to solve it, with a lot of adults kind of putting it out there that we can't really solve it, right? So coming back to the flow of today, like long-term benefits for people who go into these immersive programs and then come out of them and then go back into the more academic setting and thrive. And this is the part where I got the strongest pushback, which may have been deserved. I wrote about some students who had been diagnosed with relatively severe autism, who came and spent time in these programs I was a part of. And then I'm not a psychiatrist, I can't officially diagnose them, but it's like their autism kind of disappeared. And people are like, you can't say that, that's, and I'm like, and the idea is like, you can't cure autism. And like, I get that there's a whole spectrum of autism. There are people in my family and in my extended family who are on the spectrum. Like, I may be one of them. I understand that, like, that there's all sorts of ways we relate emotionally and non-emotionally to other people and beings, but there was at least one person who came into those programs at the beginning of the programs and was mute and would not talk to another human being. And after a year of being in the immersive high school program, started just talking to people and talk like, quote, normal or whatever. Like, they just started having normal conversations with people at the end of the year. So I think the whole point is that all of these things we're diagnosing people with and trying to give them chemicals so that they can then sit in chairs and then look at screens or then listen, like, is a symptom of a greater issue, this cognitive dissonance of that our brain is expecting different things and we're not giving it to everybody, right? Like, yeah, personally and professionally as an educator, yes. And the Walden Project, yes, there are programs out there that are doing this, that are like that. But then the other side of this, people rarely talk about, well, this is true for kids. It's probably also it also applies to us as adults. And if our jobs are all designed for us to be 40 hours or 50 hours a week sitting in front of a computer, like just typing code, or we are supposed to be, yeah. So anyway, there's more to say on that, but yeah, okay. Walden Project is an outdoors program. Yeah, this is starting to be these outdoor schools, exactly. And deep nature connection, commando style, yeah, transformed from, yeah, autism to a superlative state of being to a connective state of being. Thank you, John. Yeah, so some people might have personal experience with this. And the last thing I'll say before I start to take some questions, because I mean, I obviously, you can see I could go on and on about this, right? And maybe I'm going to do several of these over the next several weeks on Fridays, I think, is that the last thing I wanted to say is to basically consider this idea that there might be a different way to design our society, that we could actually, not superlative, from band to welcome to connected. Yeah, thank you, John. That there might be ways we could design our society, design our world with this in mind, that we're actually designing life that nourishes that hunter-gatherer brain and takes away some of this deep stress and anxiety and depression. And actually, then we might want to buy less stuff, or we might want to spend less time on our phones. We would feel more connected. And I have a feeling it would actually be better for all of nature and the biosphere and all those things as well. And that this is all symptomatic of this much bigger issue that is going on for all of us. And yeah, like I just have seen that anecdotally in people in my own life. And I think the place we can look at for the best success around this is Northern European schools. So I just kind of get stunned the more I learn about what's going on in Northern Europe. It's not perfect, but in Scandinavia, the schools there, all the schools, or a large majority of them, are what we would call forest schools. Like in places like Norway, like all the schools have to be forest schools. Kids get multiple sessions every day to go outside. Play is the emphasis of education until up to the age of 7. And there's a huge emphasis on getting people outdoors, even as adults. And all we know is that they have the happiest, healthiest population in the world with the best test scores. So that there's actual tons of data out there now. This isn't like, I've read about this a little bit in my book, but I could write a whole book about this. That it's not like what I'm talking about is an idea theoretically, because in some places they're doing this and they're getting stunning results. Like, so yeah, Evelina, designing for diversity in different ways we learn and react to things. Exactly. And at that conference that I mentioned a little while ago that I got in a little bit of trouble at for presenting some of these ideas, one of the teachers got up. She was retired. She'd been teaching for 35 years or something like that. And she said very simply, she's like, I'm pretty sure that all these people that we're diagnosing with ADHD just have a different learning style, and that a lot of them are hands-on learners, and we're not giving them enough of that. And so we can't just talk them into learning if that's not their primary learning style. So, all right. Well, what I'd like to do now for the next little bit is to take questions. Feel free to if you have a question or a comment, if you'd like to come on screen, I can do that. I can allow people to join me if they want to turn on their cameras. I know not everybody likes to do that, so I'm gonna promote you all. If you want to come on to the screen, you can. And we can get a little bit more discussion. I know, like 12-person discussion on the screen might be a little overstimulating for some people. But yeah, are there any questions or comments out there about what I've put out there so far? Yeah, go ahead, John. Sorry.
Oh, no worries. I was typing in the chat and then the chat disappeared. Nate, given your background and exposure, your practice and your experience, what is one wish that you would make based on these practices?
What is one wish I would make?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, if I had a magic wand. Well, I think I just mentioned it. And I'm imagining this is similar for all of you who are on this, maybe not. But I think my wish would be, what I was saying is that we would actually design our society, our world, our work, our education, our homes, our lifestyles with this in mind, and not with it being this deep kind of oblivious unconscious thing that's affecting us and creating this cognitive dissonance. That would be my wish. And yeah, Ayata.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Ayata's got a question here that she put into the chat here. I'll answer this as well. So yeah, and Ayata, let me know if I'm not saying your name correctly. So the obvious one, the story I told this was the most blatant, was a student who literally was so whatever was going on for them that they couldn't talk. They did not talk with other human beings. 9 months of immersion in I think a 2-day a week, maybe just even a 1-day a week nature program with some homeschooling, being able to then hold normal conversations with people. That's one example. Marion has just put into the chat another great resource about this, about the Temple Grandin, who is one of the best resources around this that I've come across, and her work about especially autistic people with an autism diagnosis being able to communicate more effectively with animals and read animal body language better than they can human body language and relationships, and that you take those folks outside where everything is nature and there's animals all around, and all of a sudden the anxiety that happens for them around not being able to read body language and not being, it eases, right? So yeah, and I would say, to be honest, that there's only the one example I can think of that was sort of a cure situation, but there's been dozens of people I know that have found therapeutic value in being in these outdoor settings, doing these kind of simulated hunter-gatherer activities, kids and adults that have some sort of diagnosis of being on the spectrum. Evelina, what's your question?
Hi. Yeah, it's just I have an experience with 8th graders. I've been doing some plant walks for county schools here, and I saw such a huge difference. We have a great Montessori school, which is a county school, and then the rest of them are just public regular schools. So I was able to do some group walks depending on which school they came from, and I saw a huge difference between the kids coming from Montessori. They were all about learning outside. Meanwhile, the public school kids were just like, you let them out of prison, they're like, we're free, and they just like wouldn't listen, just ran around everywhere, jumped into the lake, just like were crazy and out of control, which is fine. We were outside so they could play, but they weren't receptive to any learning because they were just so overwhelmed with the ability to do what they wanted, that they had no discipline, no control. And the kids from Montessori school were all like, had their notebooks, and they were so familiar with this kind of learning of just like taking in everything and then still be able to concentrate and listen to somebody and ask really great questions. So, and these were 8th graders. So I'm just like wondering if in your experience, I have, we have a couple of neighbors here with older kids, with teenagers, 15, 16-year-olds, and they're great kids, but they just like they have all this pumped up energy that like, just like, it's so hard to get them to sit down or even slow down and kind of just not be a vandal in the woods, just kind of break everything apart and run through the woods and never really pay attention to anything.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering if you have any advice.
Totally. Thank you, Evelyn. That is an awesome story. I love that story. And I'm pretty sure in high school I might have been one of those kids, in 8th grade, running around like just causing havoc. Because I'm gonna say this, but I mean this in the most respectful way. Have you ever seen what happens when you let a dog off leash who doesn't go off leash very often, right? I'm not saying teenagers are dogs, but it's very similar. It's like this animal that's longing to be wild or express its wildness. Maybe it doesn't need to be fully wild, but it's longing to be wild. And it's been on a leash or it's been inside forever, and then it's suddenly cooped up. So at summer camp programs, this is for younger kids, but at summer camp programs, the first thing that they did at Wilderness Learning School, where I worked for a long time, but a lot of other programs I know do something similar. The first thing they do is they play running games for 30 minutes to just get that exuberant, excited energy out. And then they sit everybody down and tell a story. And if you try to tell that story first, like it just animal yoga, animal movement, yeah. John, excellent. So if you were to do it again, and so part of it is it really does, if people are really, really cooped up, sometimes it can take a few days to really be able to like get them to settle in, right? The flip side of that is, I think, also to address is people come from a background, and you see this in communities of color, you see this in people from heavily urban environments who've never been outside. You get them outside and then they are not used to anything, and then they can freak out and they can shut down. So it's kind of the opposite of what you're describing. But in both those cases, the remedy is usually time. And in the folks who have not been outside as much, it's often helping them feel safe and know that they are safe and nothing's going to hurt them. And in the other case, it is designing some activities to get that exuberance out. And then potentially you can sink in and do that plant walk or whatever it might be, right? But that there's such a buildup that it's hard to access that if there's that buildup. It also might depend on the time of year and the time of day, right? So, all right. Does that help, Evelina? Okay, so couple interesting, cool things here too. Mink's got this comment here that storytelling is the most useful tool I found for shifting kids' relationship with nature from destructive to caring, right? Coyote's Guide. That's a great example too. All right, so this is a great question. So Christy, thank you for bringing this up. Okay, question, because I've heard this from others, why put so much focus on this work when the system, quote, works for a vast majority of people, and why cater to the minority? And what I think you mean, Christy, here is like, why would we design a system that's only helping the ADD, ADHD people, and then everybody else is fine? And it's a great point. And I have a lot to say about it. I think the simplest answer is that we're not actually doing fine. Like nobody's doing fine. The world is not doing fine right now. And you can look at the 24-hour news cycle to find that out. But the vast majority of people I know in my life, friends, families, communities, kids, are not doing fine. Like I'm, talking to my teenage eldest child who grew up here and grew up with this stuff, who now lives in Hawaii and is like facing depression and anxiety all the time, even though they're totally functional in school. They are like brilliant and can like ace all their classes, is dealing with depression and anxiety all the time from the world we're living in from the fact they don't have as much nature time, and from like the challenge that's going on from too much time on devices, and on top of all the normal like teenage hormonal identity stuff that everybody goes on. So I think the one point is like we're not all fine. And the world is not fine, right? Like we're talking about the erosion of the biosphere, right? The erosion of the world we're living in, and you know, on the edge of catastrophe with that all the time. And the vast majority of adults facing anxiety, depression, like anxiety and depression, you know, panic, like these things are rampant. And my true belief is that that's not the normal state of human society, that is again a symptom of what's going on a vast scale, and that we know that because there's other countries and other parts of the world where it's not as bad. So it's great questions. And yeah, being well adjusted to insanity doesn't make you sane. Thank you, Evelina. That's I like that. That's a great way to put it. Yeah, so it really is. Thank you, John. It is kind of this revolutionary idea, right? That like actually we're not all fine, and the world is not fine, and it's falling apart. So this is one of the ways we can address it. And that the societies and the parts of the world where they are addressing it, people are doing really well. And there's two different opposite ends of the spectrum too on that, I want to say. And again, this is really controversial. So I already kind of talked about the sort of Nordic Scandinavian version of this, where like they have actually redesigned society, and like, you know, there's outdoor play is built into living for everybody, that they have an ecologically sustainable model that they're at least attempting. It's not perfect, right? There are still flaws with it, but like the whole society is based around it. A lot of people bike, a lot of people walk, that the schools have nature-based as part of the curriculum. In Finland, you know, like foraging is a national pastime. Okay, so there's one place like that. But, and this is like, again, I don't want to glamorize things that aren't glamorous here. But I have now heard from, again, like dozens of people that when they have spent time in third world countries where kids do not have devices and they do not have a lot of toys, and there's a relative degree of what we would call poverty, that the kids are way happier than they are in the country, in at least in modern America. That they are playing all the time, that they are smiling all the time, that they like, you know, 15 kids from ages 16 to 6 will be playing with one soccer ball for hours. And this is in like dirt streets, you know, like things that we consider not great because of our standard of living in the modern world here in the first world, but that like the kids are thriving. And it doesn't mean there aren't challenges there around education and things like that, but that there may be pieces we're missing in those parts of the world too. So, all right, thank you. Thank you, Christy. Yeah, I've been asked that before, so I've worked on trying to come up with good answers. So, all right, any other questions or comments? Any stories anybody wants to share? Heather Joy.
Hi, I'm a mother of 2 boys and a sister of 2 brothers, and I you know, this is personal to me. I have one boy who's like, yeah, would really do great if he was outside like 10 hours a day. And that's not the reality that he's in right now. And my other boy is like, does okay in the other environments more easily. but it's like, after school, I like just let him play on the playground for like 2 hours. And like the one, it's like he's playing basketball and soccer and running and like, for those 2 hours, like he just doesn't stop moving. And the one who like has different needs in his body, he's like, gathering sticks and leaves and building with them and like getting some more kind of like quiet, reflective time that is also at a minimum in the school system. So it's like when you're outside, you get what you need. And for some of us, that's like more activity. And for some of us, it's more quiet, reflective time. And for a lot of it, it's a combination of both of those things. And so yeah, that's what I have to say about that. And and it's like it took me 45 years like of my life and like 10 years of being a mom to a boy to be like, oh, when people say ADHD, they mean me. Like, because I'm not like a boy who like runs around and bounces off the walls. Like, my needs looked more like, staring out the window, and like not being able to concentrate on what was happening in the classroom because I needed things to be paced differently or like stimulating in a different way. So that's my story. Not with any pretty polish on it, but just that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Heather. And yeah, I think you're doing exactly the right thing for your boys. And I'm really glad that you give them that time every day. And I think I can sit back here in my house and paint this picture of like what we want the world to be, and then there's the world we're living in every day, and it's not that picture yet, and it is fascinating how quickly and how healing and helpful it is for our brains to be out in nature. And I love that you were sharing the story and the differences between your two children. One of them just needs to go all out for 2 hours, high physical activity outside, and the other one wants to sit quietly and work with sticks. Like that's, and I've seen that, and ideally we create a world where kids can do both of those things. And yeah, the whole idea of just being able to look outside that window and what we need there, and I notice on your behind you, Heather, I had the opportunity to see various things in your house now, but you have a picture of a forest behind you, and how even inside the desire to have images of the outside and how soothing that can be for our brains, so thank you. And Michelle says she created the Erie Canal completely. Her boys completed the Erie Canal completely with locks a couple summers ago in your front yard. Wow. Sweet. And Ayata raised 9 children, mostly in the Pacific Northwest, most of the time off grid. And they all struggled with school, even though they might have been academically inclined because of the unsupportive environment. Yeah. And that unschooling them and supporting them to live in nature immersion was where they most thrived. Exactly. Awesome. Okay. Yeah, there's some good quotes, comments in here in the chat for you, Heather, if you want to read through those. So, yeah, thank you, Mink, about this idea that ADHD was way underdiagnosed in women for years and years and years. Yeah, same thing with autism, from what I've heard too. And it shows up differently in different people. All right, well, everybody, I think we're moving towards wrapping up for today, but I'm interested in having this discussion continue. I'd like to, in future get-togethers on Fridays, also talk about solutions, like talk about ways we can bring these rewilding tools into our lives, our children's lives, in a really simple way, because the reality is, like, I don't spend 10 hours a day outside, Heather Joy, like I don't. I do sometimes in the summertime, but they're like, it's relatively short windows. Though my wife and I talk about like those days when you're just outside all day from dawn till dusk and you're sleeping in your tent, and how amazingly rewarding that is. But like, how can we take this knowledge of our hunter-gatherer brains for ourselves, for our children, for our families, for our communities, and redesign at least our own lives to reflect that a little bit more? And so I'd like to talk about that in upcoming weeks. And yeah, maybe we can share resources. And I'm working towards, I've been working on this for months, maybe even years now, at least a couple years. I'm working on putting together a program that I'm going to call Rewilding Our Kids. And it might be called Rewilding Our Kids, Redesigning Our Future. And it's about, I think it's going to be about a 6-week thing, like an intro 6-week thing, like key things to do. But I'm hoping in the fall to potentially launch a 9-month version. And it's not just for it's not just for homeschool or unschooling people, though it could be, but it's for educators, parents, and the thing that I wanted to point out is, like, it's not that we all need to just abandon our lives and just go try to live outside all the time in a sort of pseudo hunter-gatherer style. Yeah, thank you, John. For grandparents, for seniors as well. It's more like, how do we maximize our opportunities when we can be outside, and how much do we need to, and on a daily basis, a weekly basis, a monthly basis, a yearly basis, how do we make that all work? So I'm looking forward to talking about that in the future. And I'm actually looking very forward to going outside after I get off the computer with all of you and going for a walk and doing some sit spot, and like probably throwing some rocks, and maybe looking at some tracks and listening to birds and noticing what plants are sprouting and growing and checking out the crocuses. But I wanted to give one last chance for any more questions or comments before we wrap up for today. And thank you, Christy, for that comment. We'll see you next time.
I have one more thing I want to say.
Yeah, go ahead.
You called it like the hunter-gatherer brain for ADHD. And like for me, it feels like this hunter-gatherer, like dreamer brain. Because like this inattentiveness is frequently just an attentiveness to different things. And I just wanted to say that out loud.
Yeah, thank you, Heather. Thank you for saying that. And yeah, that's a whole nother thing. But the recognition of different forms of awareness and intelligence that are beyond the ones that are just valued by our really product-driven and consumer-driven society. There's a whole level of awareness and understanding. So thank you. And thanks to everybody who's here. And thank you for your courage in sharing your stories and your input, Heather. I appreciate it. All right, everybody. Well, I encourage you all to get outside, and there'll probably be another one of these in another week. And I appreciate all of you for being here. And as always, just let me know if you have any questions or comments or stories, something you want to share, not online too. That would be great. All right, everybody. Bye.